Hello, I'm Stephen Collins. You know, every small town has legends. Those stories are shared over the dinner table, at Friday night football games, shared with friends and family. And this is Hollow in the Hill, where we believe that those stories truly matter. And we're going to visit people, places, and things to bring those stories to you.
Here are streets in every town that tell a deeper story, if you know how to listen. Here in Danville, Kentucky, 2nd Street was more than just pavement and storefronts. It was community. It was family. It was survival and joy and pride. And for too long, it was forgotten. But the soul of a street never really dies. Not when there are people like Michael Hughes still walking it, still speaking its name, and still reminding us of where we come from. This story isn't just about memory, it's about legacy. And today, we're honored to share it with you.
Hi, this is Hollow in the Hill. We're back again with our second episode. Today we have Mr. Mike Hughes.
Yeah.
And he is the director of the African American Historical Society here in Bull County and Danville. So, Michael, let's get started. What actually brought you quick?
Well, really, I've lived in Danville, grew up in Danville, and I've always followed the history. I lived on 2nd Street was one of the biggest things that got me inspired to do this because I saw 2nd Street when I was young. I hung in the pool rooms. I dropped out of school. I always tell people that I dropped out of school, but it was sort of a mutual agreement, and a friend of mine, and the assistant principal, who was Mr. Jerry Boyd, he, a good friend of mine and remained a friend of mine, he was assistant principal, and he always, was kind of looked out for me. But when I left school, I started to hang on 2nd Street, and it was cool for a minute. Because I don't need school, but I found out pretty quickly that got old real fast. I hung in the joints with the bootleggers and people bootlegging and having parties, but I was missing something, And Mr. Boyd saw me sitting on the pool room step one day, and he came to me and he said, "Michael, you need to be back in school." And I said, "Mr. Boyd, they're not going to let me back in school. They think I'm juvenile delinquent." Yeah. And he said, "Don't worry about it." He said, "Be up there on a Monday morning." And, me and my mother went up there. And the principal at that time, the one that I was having the problem with, he berated me bad. "If you do one thing and if you do this, and you'll never walk in, And Mr. Boyd was sitting behind him, and he kept saying to me, like, don't let that get to you. Because my mom was crying, and so I said, well, and so I just chilled, and got back into school and ended up graduating a year and a half later, and to a standing ovation, and because I was, and during that time, I started getting into the music scene,
Okay.
And that became a big thing for me. But the educational part was one of the big things too. So I ended up graduating from school. But at that time, the Vietnam War was in full bloom.
Now, what year was that, Michael, that you graduated?
1968.
68. So we're right in the middle of Vietnam.
Yeah. And it was such a change because I actually had a group that won the Crusade for Children in Louisville in 1968, and then to go from there to Marine Corps boot camp, a month or two later, and then another 6 months I was in combat, in a foxhole, so to speak, but I was blessed. The Lord, I always believe He had more for me to do.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So I come back to Danville. 2nd Street had changed a lot. A lot of the places had shut down, and a lot of people, some of the people, the owners, Some of them that got old and beginning to die. So by 1973, 74, 2nd Street was totally shut down. And I said, wow, that's something. So as the years, I wasn't nothing I could do then. I just always talked about it. They would have the Bates School, which was the black school, high school. They would have reunions every 2 or 3 years, and people would come together and they talk about this and that, and 2nd Street would always come up in the conversation. But 2 to 3 days, that was always been talked about. But after that was over, people would leave, go their separate ways, and was no more said about it. So I started just talking about it, and I said, wow, I need it. And people kept encouraging me, said, you should do something about that. So, and I got with some friends, Charles Gray, Linda Warren, and Martha Clark. We got together and said, we want to create a society. We want to tell this story. We don't want this story to die. So that's kind of how the Historical Society got started, and...
Now, was that 13 years ago that this kind of conversation took place?
The organization part, but the conversation was, we'd get together and not do nothing, and then somebody said you should organize. And then we met, and my brother, I want to talk about my brother, he lived on 2nd Street. He was a star basketball player and for Bates, and he lived in Louisville, and me and him would talk on the phone all the time. And one night I was talking, I looked on the thing, I seen this directory of what, this person, names of black folks that lived in Danville, where they worked, when they died, and all that. And I said, his name was Terry. I said, Terry, you seen this? He said, he pulled up on his computer and he said, oh, wow. I said, I wonder where it's coming from. I thought it was somebody. And another lady that worked at the library, Mary Garage, she called me. She said, Michael, I think I know where this is coming from. I said, the guy that's responsible for this, he's going to be having a meeting up here at the hospital, at the library tomorrow, next day, and said, you need to come up and meet him. So I went up to the library. I went upstairs. I went downstairs. I went in the back. Went back. Looking for this white guy. Looking for this black guy. I couldn't find him. Went in there. He was a white guy named Michael Dennis. He had moved from Iowa. To make a long story short, he is a big part. Him and I wrote the book. We wrote a book a couple years ago, but he's a big part. He does most of the statistical work, and so we was able to get started, and just became a labor of love, And I started collecting pictures. I started about 25 pictures, and well over 15,000 pictures, on the, And
now, most of those, I imagine, have been donated to the society. Is that correct?
Yeah. Kind of, yeah. Most time, cause people would call me. I even got an envelope one time from, it just had Cincinnati, Ohio on it, and it had a bunch of pictures in it. And right today, I can't tell you who sent those pictures, but they was great pictures,
So they're coming in from all over the world.
All over.
Back here to Danville.
Yeah, come to Danville because people follow me now. They want me to get the picture because they know that I'm going to put them out there for people to see. And the thing that kind of gets to me now, that a lot of the folks that was around 13 years ago have gone on to glory, but they would call me and say, I tell you who's in this picture, and I have some trouble now getting identifications, but I don't let that stop me, I keep trying, because a lot of times if you can just have a name, you can find out. I was telling you earlier, I found the name of a guy and his brother, and he had a whole family that lives here in Danville, black family that we didn't know even existed, and his story is just, one of the few. It's a lot of stories, man. You know, baseball. You know, the baseball team, black baseball team. That was one of the biggest. I mean, that was every Sunday, every weekend. You know, people went to the park down on Duncan Hill, and one of the stories from the baseball thing that I wanted to share was about baseball. We recognized some of the Danville Yankees. There was a lot of teams. The Danville Yankees, the Cubs, you know, they all played. I mean, if you wasn't at the park on a Sunday, you know, you know,
something bad wrong with
yeah, I don't know where you'd be, you know, but
Right.
and baseball was such a big thing, you know, such an entertainment, man. And there were white teams too that competed, you know, and there were white players that played on the black teams, you know. So what, you know, that makes me think it's so much different now. You know, I think people got along better. You know what I'm saying? I think they really did, you know, because they didn't have that, you know.
Right.
You know, the people got along. The white players, they felt at home, you know, and so, you know, and these cats would travel in a old truck to Cincinnati, anywhere, just to play ball, you know, and so.
You know, one thing I've always felt, Michael, if people would get out and meet individuals,
Yeah.
as opposed to just listening to what's being forced on them.
Forced on sitting
You
in front
know,
of TV
then-
trying to tell
then
me.
I think the world would be a lot better place because
I do
that's
too.
one couple that brings to my mind. I when I was younger and in church and things, there was a black couple that was a babysitter of mine, and Mr.
Yeah.
Joe and Minnie Graves, and I just absolutely loved those folks. They were just the salt of the earth, and just loved and enjoyed going over there and staying with them. And Miss Minnie be cooking on the stove, and I
Yeah.
mean just just
yeah.
tear your stomach up waiting to eat.
Yeah,
You know,
man.
but you know, I think if folk would do that and just, you know, because people's just people.
Yeah.
You know, and at the end of the day, everybody just trying to accomplish the same thing. They want
Yeah.
they want to provide for their family.
And listen to
and
what the
nothing wrong
Lord
with that.
says, you know what I'm
Mhm.
saying?
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
the churches are always, black churches around here have always been strong. And that's one thing that's still strong, you know, because a lot of the businesses, there's hardly no black businesses that are, you know, still around. But the churches remain strong, you know, and that's the foundation that, you know, kept everything going, you know. So, you know,
Michael, let's go back a little
Okay.
bit to some of your younger years. You said you're kind of a little bit delinquent in school and whatnot. And so let's start right after your graduation. You had talked about you went to Vietnam and things. So once you got back from Vietnam and Second Street had changed so much,
Okay.
well, take me to an individual back at that time that really inspired you or meant a lot to you from that era before you went to Vietnam, from when you were younger years. Who would be an individual that really
One of the was my cousin J.B. Tibbs. He ran the pool room down on the second block, down on Second Street, and he would tell me, you know, this. Let me tell you how I got to meet him. I always wanted to get in the pool room, right? You know, you're young, ain't much to do, so you want to get in the pool room. So I would go down there, and I'd stand on the lip outside.
Right.
A lot of times I just stand outside the pool room, acting like I was wanting people to think I was inside, but I wasn't, you know. But I wanted to go in there. And Mr. Tibbs, if you knew him, he had these eyes, man, and he had a reputation, which, you know, that he didn't play around, you know. So. Yeah, he's on business. So I wanted to get in this pool room so bad. And so one day I said, I'm going to go in here. Because when you go in there, Mr. Tibbs was sitting in his chair right by the door. And he'd look around like that at everybody that came in the door, right? So I stepped up on the thing. I peeped in the door. And Mr. Tibbs looked around. I jumped back out. And I got myself together. I said, I'm going in here. He's just going to tell me, get out. You know, can't come in. So I stepped inside the door, just shaking, scared to death, you know. And Mr. Tibbs looked around me. He said, "Boy, who's your parents?" And I said, Robert and Scotty Hughes is my parents. He said, "Boy, come on in here. You my damn cousin." So he took me under his wing, taught me how to play pool. 3 weeks later, I was bringing my boys in too. You know, my guy, come on, man, I'm in the pool room. You know, and he told me stories. This is how I learned a lot, because he lived close to where I lived at, and he would have me. I'd go down and sit on his porch, and his wife would bring out us drink, because she knew I was coming on a Sunday evening after church and stuff. And he'd tell me stories, and I'd hear about all of the guys that play. He told me a story about a guy named Eb Harlan, and I've only been able to get a little information on him over the years. But he said Eb Harlan was, if you remember the movie Green Mile, but now this was way before the Green Mile, but the big guy that played in, I can't think of his name. Anyway, he told me, he said, this guy, Eb Harlan, he said, man, he was a monster. He said he wouldn't go to school, said he was real, he said he'd come to school on Thursday so he could play sports on a Friday, you know. And said they'd let him play, you know, because he was that powerful. Said they would be in the huddle, football, so they'd be in the huddle, and they say, Eb, this play is going around to the right. He said, okay. So they sent the ball, said Eb would go left. And said, couldn't nobody tackle him, so he'd be in the end zone shaking people off and stuff, you know. And said he'd do that, said he'd play basketball. Said he'd come, play basketball, score. And you got to think about, in those days, there wasn't no three-point plays, nothing. Right. So he's going to score 16, 17 points. He said, I don't want to play no more. And so he'd walk off the court. And so they wouldn't see him till the next game. And, you know,
Each character, wasn't he?
Yeah, he said and, you know, and somebody telling you this in the 60s, right. And then you see this guy in this, you know, and you think about, wow, was he like that, you know? So he told me all the kind of stories, and he hit me to, you know, all the old joints and stuff. But, you know, he told me, like, I don't know if you ever heard of what they call them speakeasies, but for that time period, they called them blind taggers. You ever heard of them?
I've heard the term, yeah.
Blind taggers, and they was all over Danville, you know. And the gentleman that was in here earlier was telling me about somebody that he knew that used to raid those things, you know. And so he would tell me about the blind taggers and stuff like that. So I kind of kept all of this, you know, all them years. This was before I even went to Vietnam. See?
Right.
But it was still on my mind, you know. Right. And when I got back, Mr. Tibbs was real ill. He died a couple of years after that. But I just knew there was a story to be told, you know. And I didn't want it. I didn't think about my legacy. I was thinking about the legacy of the black community not being told, because there was no books. Nobody was writing about it, you know. I mean, it just, like I say, at a class reunion, school reunions, people was, you know, they talk about it, but after they leave, go back to their own place, you know, it would just be so. It was really important to me to do that, and I wasn't, even when I started, and even with the festival we had, the Solar Secretary Festival, it was just, I wanted people to come together. Right. I felt like that, and one of the stories, first Solar 2nd Street Festival we had, and my friend, the lady, she's still around. The other lady has passed, but Phyllis Key came to me and said, do you think Lucretia Boston is here at this festival? I said, I don't know. I said, I'll go to the stage. I went to the stage and called for Lucretia, because I knew she was there, but I didn't, you know, and they came together. They hadn't spoken, this was in, 2015. They hadn't seen each other or spoken since the 50s.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
They came together at that festival, and they talked every week on the phone until the one lady passed from COVID in 2020. But But see, when you hear those stories, when you're able to do that, it's, I mean, that's what it's all about.
For sure.
Yeah,
For sure.
So I, so.
That's one of the reasons why we started the show. It's to share those stories that, well, like you've shared with me today, that, are heroes and inspirations to people, but they're just lost to, and like you and I were talking, once those older folk are gone, those stories are gone. That history's gone.
The history's gone.
And I think it's so important that we try to keep that alive for, folk today. If you said speakeasy to somebody under 30 years old, they're not going to know.
And they wouldn't.
For the most part.
Especially I said blind tag.
Exactly.
I say that sometimes, and people look at me like,
right.
what are you talking about?
Right.
And because, there used to be, that the black folks used to have their own fairs.
Yes.
They have a fair every year, I've read stories where they had a fair that stretched from all the way by the viaduct, all the way up to Main Street, coming up, not on Main Street, but coming up Warner Street.
Right.
When Warner Street went all the way through like that, and stuff like that, you just don't know it happened. You think, kids grow up thinking Danville was Danville like it is now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost, the more I listen to it and everything else, it's like it was two different Danvilles. Like it was a Danville up to a point, and then now it's a modern Danville.
Let me go back a little bit and talk about, back in those days, there was black Danville and there was white Danville.
Okay.
Where integration, the movie theater that set on Main Street, you had to sit in the balcony. I sat in the balcony and watched many movies. That was just the way it was. There was a restaurant on the corner called the White House. Steve, the guy that was here earlier, he knew about that one. You could not go in there. You could, and then finally you could go in there and get a hamburger, but you had to leave. So I experienced it. I didn't experience. Sometimes I think about, did I experience the water fountain where you couldn't drink?
Right.
And I did experience the restroom, because you could not use the restroom in the Kentucky Theater. You had to walk out of the theater and come all the way down here to the gas station to use the restroom. So I did experience that,
Right.
So, and school-wise, integration, integration was a challenge. It wasn't a big challenge, or it wasn't like down in Arkansas or some places where you had to have the state police and all that. But the challenges was there. I was a sophomore going into junior year when the schools integrated, and there was a challenge there. People asked me, but it was a challenge because for the first few years, and this is another thing. In 1963 and 1964, Danville Bate, which was the black high school, defeated Danville High School in the basketball championships. In 64-65 year, they integrated. And I think one of the biggest pushes was because, they wanted to get the black athlete in the school, but at the same time, there was an unwritten rule that you could not have but two black on the floor at the same time.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't realize.
Yeah, and that wasn't just high school.
Right.
That was in college and a lot of, now, and it was unwritten rule.
Well, the NBA be in trouble with that rule today, wouldn't it?
They wouldn't stand up 5 minutes,
Wow.
And no, you could not have more than two, and it was a challenge for the coaches,
Oh, imagine, yeah.
Coach Cottrell, and he wanted to be fair, but he was under a lot of pressure from the community, which the community put pressure on the school. You know what I'm saying? So he had to do it, but I don't think that lasted long. Now, I've been researching for the last month or so, just when black cheerleaders was able to, they didn't even get a chance to audition. See, you look at Bay School. Bay School was a proud black school.
Right.
And they had cheerleaders that was, probably I ain't gonna say that, but some of them had to be better than the ones that. But when it come to the first year, 64, 65, none was offered an audition spot. Another thing, there was none of the black teachers that came from Bait was given an interview. None of the black male teachers. And there's a story behind that, but I won't go into that. But I'll leave that. I'll let that lie. But they did not get interviewed, and some of the people that graduated from the 63 from students, seniors in 63, 64, went off to college, got their degrees, come back and applied for jobs at Danville, and was still denied. I think it was 72 that the first black teacher, male teacher.
And we're not talking about that long ago.
No.
I mean, this is recent history.
No, it's not that far ago.
This is not any of that.
No.
And I think like you said a while ago, in some attributes, folk got along a little bit better then.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the other side of that coin was there was still so much division. And
they got along. Yeah, there was division, and it was more subtle in some places. But I think that nowadays it's a lot better. It could be a lot. There's that we've covered a lot of ground.
Right.
But it's like being in a field, and you plow. When you first look at the field, it's all messed up.
Yeah.
And then you get in there and you plow, and then after a while you look at it and say, well, it's coming along. Right. You know what I'm saying? But there's still some places that need to be.
And you're always happy when you see the short.
Yeah.
And just like that, everything began to change. The people, the places, but not the soul. On 2nd Street, there's a spot where the soul still cooks. Honeycomb soul food is more than a meal. It's memory. It's family. The owner came from Lexington, but his wife's roots run deep in Danville. In that kitchen, they're serving up something this street's always had: soul. And it ain't just in the food, it's in the music too.
Michael, let's talk about.
Okay.
You had mentioned the Soul Festival y'all do every year. What time of year does that happen?
That's in August. We usually have it second week in August.
Second week of August.
That's usually the best week, we've had to switch it a couple of times. Then there was 2 years we didn't have it at all because of COVID, So, but we always try. I want to talk about a little bit about that music-wise. How that keeps me in. That kept kind of. I wanted to have a festival, have music, and but I want to see. I started. If I make it to next year, Lord willing, that'll be 60 years I've been a performer in music-wise. I started with a group called the Night Owls, and this is what was, I grew up. The music was in my soul, I sung in church, but I wanted to be on stage. It was just part of who I was. So what I would do, we lived over on Bay Street, and I would get my suit and tie on. My mom would catch me getting ready to leave out of the house, and she said, "No, you're not going out of here tonight." I said, "Mom, I'm just putting my suit on and get ready for church." And I'd go out the house. We had a toilet up on the hill. And I said, I'll be right back. I'm going to the toilet. And I just tried my suit on to, see how, and I go down the side of the house and head out. And I started playing with a group called the Night Owls. Those guys was 30. I was 17. And
now, what kind of music were y'all playing then?
R&B. There's another point. See, back in them days, you didn't have the thousands of songs to play from that you do now. Right. We had about 15 songs, 10 songs. We played this first set. We played the 10, 15 song. Then we come back the second set, said, y'all like that music so much, we're going to play them all again. And so one night, I want to go one night, we was in Winchester, Kentucky, playing at the American Legion. We done played 2 sets, same songs. So we said, what we going to do now? So we had a guitar player that was just, if he was around now, he'd be a millionaire overnight. That's how good he was, just natural. And I think I was telling Brandon, I was telling him one time that guys back then they didn't really know a D flat from an A minor or nothing. They just knew what was happening. So the guitar player gets up and goes back to the stage, picks his guitar up and gets to doing this stroke. And the bass player walked up, and his name was Dennis, and he asked Harvey, said, who was the guitar player, said, what are you playing, man? He said, I don't know, just keep on playing till you get something. And they started playing. Then the drummer came, drummer started playing. We went to the microphone, and we started singing, keep on playing till you get something. And we sung at it for 20 minutes till we got till we was able to get it out, to get that money. You know what I'm saying? Right. We don't, so that's how.
It's just a jam.
It's just a jam. Just kept on playing till you get something. Then we'd say, come, give it to the guitar player. And he played for a little while, and then we jump back in with the vocals. Keep on playing till you get something. And man, they thought it was a song that we knew, And today, some of the groups I play with today, I share that with them, and we'll do a little something about it. But it was all those guys are gone. Every one of those guys that played in that band, gone on to glory. So, but they was, and that was, those times were so great. You know what I'm saying? And then I started. I come back from Vietnam in '73, and bands was no longer popular. Everybody wanted DJ music became. So I said, well, if I can't sing, I'll DJ. Right. So I started DJing. So, and it became, But that was, those were good times,
Now, were you able to play music while you were overseas in Vietnam?
You know what? Yeah, I'm glad you know what? I wasn't going to be denied. So when I was stayed in Okinawa, Japan for about 2 months. And so they'd have a band in the club, I couldn't stand it. After about hearing them 2-3 times, I went to them and said, I sung in a band. Can you sing? Can I sing one with you? And they let me sing, and it got to be I was singing with them every night. They let me bring me up and sing a song. That was a week before, a couple weeks before I went to Vietnam. So, So yeah, music has been part of my life because I still sing in church choir and stuff. Because I feel that. You have to, it means something to me to be able to do that too, and I love that just as much, almost more than I do the stage, because I it's good,
For an artist and a musician to be around the other musicians and not be able to participate.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's killing me.
It just gets you because you want to be in there.
Yeah, it's killing me. I can.
From juke joints to church pews, the soul of 2nd Street echoes the same spirit you hear in B.B. King's guitar, in Ray Charles's voice, in Stevie's keys, and Louis Armstrong's horn. That same spirit lived right here in Danville, and it still does.
So, Mike, we were talking about music a moment ago, and you're still playing singing band now.
Yeah.
Okay.
I actually performed a couple of days ago with a group called the Power Play. They're friends of mine. I try to, be versatile. You know, I have another group called Michael Fly and Sound, and then you know, sometimes I just, you know, 2 or 3 musicians get together. You know, but mostly because, you know, it just gives me tell the story through music. You know what I'm saying? And it keeps. I ain't gonna say it keeps me young, but that ain't gonna but make you feel young anyway. You know, so but you know, that's part. But like I say, that and singing in my church choir. You know.
Music truly is medicine to the soul.
Yeah, it is.
You know,
it is.
and you can take it and you can take it and use it to be happy or to be sad or to help you through situations and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So,
I always had this passion, you know, from back in the day in the early years, talent shows. I used to have talent shows at the black school every year, and you know that man, it was some guys. They talk about American Idol. If American Idol could come to the schools back in the '64, they wouldn't been able to pick because there were so many people like Lonnie O'Hara. He went on to be, still is right now, you know, from star. So music, it you know, I don't know. I just take a song. I learned a song last week from my church choir called what's the name of it now? See, that's something else. Old age, make you have to think for a minute what you're trying to say. You know,
right?
Lord, I need you to hold my hand. That's and that song, you know, tells the story of, you know, everyday life. You know, and the thing about this song, when I was trying to learn it, I would wake up. My wife would say, we'd wake up at night, because that's how I learned music, over and over and over. And I'd wake up, she said, what are you doing? I said, I'm doing my homework, you know, and, you know, so, you know. But music has always been part of, you know, what I do, you know. And I don't think, I think if you don't really enjoy the music, you know, or use it as a tool for make you feel better when you're feeling down, you know what I'm saying? All that. So I hope to continue, you know. I'm gonna say this on camera, but it probably ain't gonna happen. If I live another year, I said I was gonna retire, but I know I ain't gonna do it. I ain't really, you know, this because I just, you know, been doing it so long, you know, but
well, you know, they say it gets in your blood, but I think it's even deeper than that. It becomes a part of your soul, part of your personality, and things like that. And it's just a part of your essence of who you are as a person. You know.
Yeah, it is. It just, you know. So. When I started playing back with power play, you know, they asked me to come back and play, and I resisted. And they said, well, come to practice, you know, and just listen. So 2 months later, I'm on stage singing with them again, and they're such good guys, man, you know.
They may have had that in mind when they called.
Maybe, you know, because some of the guys that play in there, a couple of them play in my regular, one of my other bands, and some of them I played with years ago. So, you know, so I decided to do it. The culture, man, it didn't give us a chance to. It never got a chance. We did a survey a few years ago about if those buildings were still there, and they've been renovated like they was promised, and black business was, you know, I think it was something, how those buildings was worth in 1970 was probably $125,000 for all the whole street.
Right.
When you look at it today, it's in the millions.
Oh,
you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, so that's what was taken away. You know, I wasn't even given a chance. My brothers all the time, you know, and I've had a daughter lose her life, grandsons, you know, and so and God has still kept me, you know, able to do what I do, and it seems like, to me, I feel like he's always had this mission for me. I feel like this was a mission.
Yeah.
I feel like he guided me, and it seemed like just when I needed something to keep it going, that he's always found a way to make sure that happens.
Yeah.
Just like this interview here, give me a chance to, share with the world, with whoever,
Well, Michael, I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation today. I really
Yes, sir.
have, man.
Oh,
and
I
I'm
really-
so glad to meet you. It's been an
Yeah.
honor, and I feel like we could talk another 2 hours.
Yeah, we could.
So we may
Then
have,
maybe play some music.
oh, for sure. We may have to have another episode.
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah,
But,
right. No, okay.
yeah, I've really enjoyed our conversation, man.
His street was full of life, full of laughter, of rhythm, of struggle, and of hope. What happened here mattered, and the light that came from this block, it still shines, not just in history books, but in the hearts of everyone who carries it forward, black, white, young, old. This light was never meant for one group alone. It was meant to shine for all of us. We tell these stories so they won't be forgotten, and to remind each other that soul like this never dies. It only grows stronger when we share it.
As I think about my life, I think how I've been blessed. And I've come through a lot, but I've always kept the Lord on my side. And He's blessed me. He gave me, when times were down, a lot of times, you chase dreams that are not made for you and become nightmares. But I remember all through my years, I've been a people person. Always been a people person. In a time when Danville was black and white, I was still a people person. And by being that, I was able to make friends and share things with friends. And I think that if you keep that kind of attitude, if you grow up with that attitude, because I grew up in a religious household. I was in church when I didn't even know I was alive. My mother, father, stepmother, stepfather who raised me, they made sure that I knew about the Lord early in my life, and and there have been times, like I said, that I've chased dreams that wasn't meant for me, and they become nightmares. But through it all, I was able to progress, and it's been, and nowadays I can see the fruits of what I have learned and what I did, and I just wanted to share Danville and the African American experience, because I know a lot of times it hasn't been, it didn't get talked about. It wasn't in books. It was not in. Nobody wrote anything about it, but at the same time, it was a story. It was a life. It was people that lived on the street. It was the people that progressed. But I've been able to do that through the help of a great team with the African American Historical Society, and that is why I feel like that I have accomplished something as I go forward. Once again, I want to thank Brandon and his company for asking me to sit down and talk and tell my story. So thanks so much. God bless.
Hi, I'm Stephen Collins, and this concludes episode 2 of Hollow in the Hill. We're here at the historical Bates School that we mentioned in our episode, and we're looking forward to episode 3. Stay tuned, and we'll see you soon.